Welcome to the premiere episode of the Modern Times podcast. This is a podcast dedicated to fans of Charlie Chaplin and the silent movie era. We hope this show gives you a bit of insight on this subject, while we also have some fun as well. We have three big Chaplin fans here today. First of all, Sarah, why don't you introduce yourself to us?
Hi, I'm Sarah Beagleson. I'm from Kansas City, but I'm currently in Lynchburg, Virginia, where I go to college. I got into Chaplin when I was 13, watching The Great Dictator in one of my history classes, and I thought it was so funny, and it made me want to do my own research and watch more of his films, because I recognized his character, but I'd never actually seen any of his movies. And sophomore year of high school rolled along, and I had to do a biography of someone of my choice through a book, and I found a Chaplin biographical book in my school's library and probably read it front to cover twice, and it was so good, and I did my own research online, more books. I read Chaplin's own autobiography, watched the Chaplin biopic by Richard Attenborough many times. I own it, and I just adore his films very much.
All right, Anne.
Okay, my name is Anne Munley. I live in Tampa, Florida. I'm originally from New Jersey. How I got into Chaplin, well, I'm dating myself here, but in 1972, I was watching the Academy Awards. I was, a young girl, and I seen this old man on the stage, and he was getting, all this applause and all this accolades, and somebody said Charlie Chaplin, and I looked at this old man, and I couldn't put the two together. I knew the tramp character, everybody kind of does know that character. But I remember thinking to myself, this man must be a man of great, esteem, or just, this wonderful human being. And then, 40 years later, my father was a big fan of old films and silent films, and me, like a lot of other people, it's silent films, boring, and, because, you always think of the tinny music, the piano music, and the action was, frantic, and, I thought, oh my God, this is boring. And I was actually on the internet, and this is after my father passed away. I was on the internet, and I came across the ending of City Lights, and they said that this is the greatest piece of, footage to ever be shown, it was a magnificent piece of film. And I watched it, the end of it, and I was like, wow, it kind of touched me. And then I started, finding out things about him. But I saw the kid, and that hooked me. I mean, that rooftop scene where he's rescuing his son, I could watch that on a loop. I mean, it's just magnificent. And I found myself, really, almost falling in love with him, because I started reading about him, and the thing is, I started to realize he's so relatable. The things that his films were about is as, relevant today as it was 100 years ago.
That's awesome. I mean, I feel like all three of us can relate to that, as far as being a fan of this, but having a hard time finding other people that enjoy it.
Right, yeah.
And when you try to explain, your fandom towards this, they look at you all confused.
Yeah.
Oh, why would you watch that? It's old, how could you watch a black and white movie? Why would you watch a black and white movie? Why would you watch a movie that doesn't have sound?
But I think part of it, too, is Hollywood acts as though, it began in 1930, but there was 40 years before that, or 30 years, and they don't give the respect to the people that came before them.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the thing is that, in 1934 or 35, when the Hays Code came down and censored everything, Hollywood films were sanitized. But if you look at silent films, Charlie Chaplin himself dealt with a lot of social issues, prostitution, drug addiction, violence, hunger. I mean, he dealt with so many things, and a lot of silent films did. But once the Hays Code came, there was all this stuff, that you couldn't talk about.
Well,
And
Charlie also dealt with them in a funny way, though. He took things that were really social ills
right,
and really taboo subjects, and he was
right,
able to make them almost PG,
right, yeah,
whereas almost like The Simpsons, when you watch The Simpsons, there's jokes that the adults get and there's jokes that the kids get.
Yeah.
So the family can watch the show together and not really, but they'll laugh at different things. Such as in that scene in Easy Street when he sits down on the heroin needle
yes,
and he goes all crazy and he turns into a superhero almost.
Yeah.
It's that, if a kid's watching that, they're not going to understand what that is.
No.
Or so, but when the adults watch it, it's like, wow, that's a weird thing to make a joke about.
And before that, though, he actually shows this man in the basement with poor Edna that's putting a needle to his arm. And it's funny.
I always thought it looked like Edgar Allan Poe a little bit.
He did. I mean, he took the heroin needle to the ass and started kicking butt and cleaning house. And then it's ironic that in modern times he did the same thing. He sniffed some cocaine and
The nose powder, yeah.
Powder, yeah.
When I showed that movie at school, all the kids thought that was funny that that's what they were calling it.
Right.
They got a joke out of that.
Right. It's those little things that make him kind of relevant. It's like, oh wait, he's talking about drugs and actually Modern Times was the first film where Charlie Chaplin had to present it to the censors.
Mm-hmm.
And actually he wanted to put dope, on the intertitle card, but he had to change it to nose powder.
Mm-hmm.
And Chaplin had such control of his films. I can imagine he did not appreciate having people to tell him, no, you got to change this, you got to change that.
Yeah, because that came out during the censorship in the
Right.
30s, right?
And that's why people get this idea that, Hollywood started in the 30s with all these, sanitized films, and no, there's like a whole other chapter. And through Chaplin, of course, I got to know about other silent films, and, so it's just, a learning experience. And you kind of got to see how people really lived back then.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And it's like a history thing. And guess what? People had the same problems then as they did today. The unfortunate part, though, is they had no resources. Like today, there are things, if you're poor and whatever, there's social programs, though they're trying to cut them. But, I mean, they're still there. Back then, that was it. You're poor, and Charlie Chaplin showed that because he just because he was poor, he was suspect.
He had an angle and a viewpoint that a lot of people that were working in Hollywood didn't have. Growing up as he did.
Yes, how he did.
Mm-hmm.
The Kid is my absolute favorite. And the Rooftop Rescue, I love that because I really think that was Charlie actually having an almost out-of-body experience and thinking about his own mother being, taken from him when he was, and he was like a madman trying to rescue this boy. And he ends up actually becoming then a criminal because as far as they were concerned, he kidnapped this child. And in 1971, when he, edited, the movie, but when he did that score, when the music plays with that Rooftop Rescue, no matter how many times I watch it, it's still just,
I saw that scene every time.
It's
the music just enhances it.
Yes.
Well, that's the reason why I feel they used that as like the final piece when they did his Academy Award thing, because that's the definitive performance of him, and it's so autobiographical too.
Right, and that scene, the kid, that big moment when he rescues Jackie Coogan, it's you don't even have to watch the whole movie to understand. You can just watch that part to understand the autobiographical sense versus the end of City Lights, which is absolutely heartbreaking. You have to watch the whole movie to understand it.
Oh, yeah. If you see the clip out of context, yeah, it doesn't have the same weight that it does when the film, especially when you learn about Chaplin's past. You really, then it really becomes even more so important.
Oh, for
Right.
sure.
You know, and Jackie Coogan, you know, he was such, I mean, magnificent, and he was just like a mimic. And that's what Charlie Chaplin really wanted from his actors, which is a lot different than most directors. He wanted you to, and you know, and it's not just like somebody wrote it in, you know, wrote it in a book. There's people that are still here today, you know, Claire Bloom, and that says that that was his style. He wanted you to do this, this, and this, you know.
He liked to have people who had no training because he wanted to break them down and train them from his perspective,
Edna
which is
Burton,
why he got Edna and some of the other actresses
yeah.
that he did. He didn't want anyone else teaching them, you know, their methods. He wanted to do it on his own. So he liked people that didn't even have any film training whatsoever.
I heard that if he could have played every part, he would have.
Yes. That's what
Definitely.
Robert Parrish, who played the newsboy in City Lights, you know, when he was talking about how he directed, that's what he said, that, you know, he wished that he could be in front and behind the camera.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, it's funny, that style is what is really what caused a big problem between him and Marlon Brando.
Oh, right.
Which makes me wonder, why would Marlon Brando accept that role? You know what I'm saying?
Because it was Charlie Chaplin. That's
Yeah, you don't say no to that, even if you're not keen on the person.
right.
That looks good on your resume.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he knew how he was. I mean, you know, that was, excuse me, his style. But like you said, anybody would take that because being affiliated with Chaplin could only, you know,
Help you.
Yeah.
How I got into Chaplin was when I was in high school. There was this kid who I became friends with, and we started talking about movies and things, and I'd always loved Nosferatu and King Kong and all the old stuff.
Yeah.
And I knew about Chaplin, but I didn't know that much about him.
Right.
So he told me that his grandma had a set of Chaplin tapes, and I could borrow them if I wanted to. So I was like, all right, sure.
Right.
So he brought me one of those, and it was like one of those 5 VHS tape sets of a bunch of the Keystones and the S&As all mixed together.
Oh, geez.
And with the, you know, Jelly Roll Morton music, you know, that has nothing to do with Chaplin. But at the same time, I put them in, and I now associate those songs with those Chaplin movies just because that's how I grew up on them originally. So that made me a fan of the Jelly Roll Morton music too, because I ended up going out and getting a CD of his stuff.
Right.
But I put in the first tape, and unbeknownst to me, it was Kid Auto Races. And I had no idea, you know, I just put the first tape in not knowing it was the first Chaplin, you know, tramp film.
Right.
And just that in and of itself, even as bad as the quality was of that print, and the bad music, the music that wasn't, you know, had nothing to do with Chaplin, it all just worked. And I loved it, and I watched that 6-minute movie over and over and over again. And from there on out, I just discovered all the rest, and, you know, we'll go to local video stores and find a Chaplin film here, find a Chaplin film there. They'd have City Lights at a Blockbuster, then they have Modern Times at a different video store.
Right.
And through there, I just started amassing all of his films and becoming more and more interested in everything. Got the books and things from the library. So, you know, really have to thank the video stores and the libraries, because without that, I mean, now we have the internet and everything, but
the internet has all of them.
When I first started getting into Chaplin, you couldn't just download the stuff like you can now. You had to go out and find it.
Right, yeah, and that's why I give a lot of kudos to the, you know, because there's people that visit my page, you know, like Phil Posner and James Nyberg. They've been fans, you know, since the 60s. And the amount of knowledge we have with the access to everything took them years, you know, to get. They'd have to find old magazines or, like you said, go to the library, you know. And, you know, it's funny about Kids Auto Race. you look at it, and now you look at it, you realize these people are witnessing the birth of this iconic character. But to them, this guy was just being a complete pain in the ass.
Mm-hmm.
Saying he was just being a pain in the ass, and that's what makes him so relatable. He just, it's like you might even know somebody like that, and just.
That's the cool thing, though, about it is that not only do you get to see the birth of Chaplin, and he's almost fully formed, there's a couple of things he does in the film that he wouldn't have done later on in movies, being such a jerk, I think.
Yeah.
But
sentimental in his features.
I would say 80% of the character is there, though.
Oh yeah.
The costume is almost there, 100%.
Oh, for sure.
I don't think he has the big shoes,
No.
and I don't think his pants are as baggy as they would be later on.
Dash is a little bit more of its time, 1914.
That's true.
And the thing about that film, it clearly shows that Henry Larimer,
Yeah.
he did not like him, because there's a couple of times when he pushes him in that film, and he's pushing him with, hard,
Yeah.
like, oh, this is part of the scene, and then he just shoves him, and, so that's interesting to see, but yeah, to
That close-up at the end is one of my favorites. I think that's the first, because Chaplin didn't do close-ups that often.
Right.
And when he did, it was a real, impact. There was a real reason for the close-up. Now, of course, back in the Keystone days, that kind of thing wasn't as thought about as it was when he was making the later films.
Right.
But, it's just cool that you have a Chaplin close-up in his first film as the Tramp.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I've seen prints that close-up isn't in, too. I've seen there's a video version that I had that cuts off before that part is there, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
But Sarah, you've seen Kid Auto Races.
Absolutely, yeah.
So how do you feel about that?
I like, just because obviously it was a real race, all the silence that Keystone did during that time was just like, oh, something's going on, let's go and let's make a movie. That's what Keystone did. That's what most movie productions did back then. And Chaplin just came out, and that was technically the second Tramp film he filmed, but Kid Auto Races came out first because they just needed to put something out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like the people, the public, just standing around. They have no idea what's going on. They're like, who's this? And they don't even realize that that annoying little man is going to be the most famous person in the world.
Right.
And not in very much time. Probably in a few weeks, he will be the most famous person in the world.
Yeah, if you compare Kid Auto Races to, what was the one film, Gentleman of Nerve?
Right.
There's a later one that takes place at a race, and it's got Mabel Normand in it and Chester Conklin.
Right.
What's cool about it is it's almost the same type of thing where they went to an event and just filmed a movie there,
Right.
but you can tell a big difference from the fact that in Kid Auto Races, nobody really knows who Chaplin is, and in Gentleman of Nerve, everybody knows who he is.
Right.
And they're all kind of trying to be in the movie. They're all kind of laughing more over the top at what he's doing. Like, they know they're more in on what's going on now,
Right.
versus Kid Auto Races, which was only a few months beforehand.
Right.
You could definitely tell a different vibe with the audience. There's even a lady in Kid Auto Races that's covering her face up with a newspaper or piece of paper. There was such a new technology, and nobody knew really what was going on or how it works. So I think a lot of people were almost afraid of it. And as far as my favorite feature goes, I would have to say City Lights.
Really good.
I've seen it so many times, and I don't want to say that I'm burned out on it, but it doesn't really hold the same impact as it used to because I've seen it so many times. But at the same time, there's a reason I've seen it so many times.
Right.
And it's just, people complain about City Lights because they say Chaplin's not funny in it, or it's not as funny as some of his other films. They say it's more of a drama than it is a comedy, which is true in an aspect.
Right.
You don't get a lot of this zany slapstick comedy, although there is in that scene with the
boxing scene, right?
The boxing scene, and there's a scene in the dinner hall where he's drunk.
Yeah, right, with the millionaire.
Mm-hmm.
Still drunk.
And that's a complaint that feel like a lot of non-Chaplin fans have as to reasons why they're not Chaplin fans, as opposed to the Three Stooges or a lot of other stuff. They go because they don't think Chaplin is funny. But I think it's a different kind of humor. You know, you can watch Chaplin all day, but I can only get through a couple Three Stooges shorts before it's like, okay, you know,
It's the same, yeah.
you have to take a break from it. Chaplin you can watch because it's constantly going between drama and comedy, and there's a story, and there's all these things going on that you don't get in a lot of those comedy films at that time.
Uh-huh.
Harold Lloyd and Keaton definitely had it, but you know, there's definitely a rivalry there between fans.
Yeah.
And a lot of those fans just don't like Chaplin. I think they get...
They don't, and I think sometimes they resent his success. I mean, and they get rabid. And very few times will a Chaplin fan just start out with saying, oh, you know, who do you like, Keaton or Chaplin? They don't really get into, I mean, you know, they don't usually start the conversation. You know what I'm saying? Somebody else does. They were two entirely different, you know, artists.
When you think about that rivalry between the three of them, they weren't rivals in real life. They were all real friendly with each other. It was the fans that almost put them against each other, right?
I've heard this thing where, you know, they shared gags, and it's not, I mean, I've never read it. I mean, if it's possible, but it just doesn't seem like that's something Charlie Chaplin would do, because he stored all of his information in his head and, you know, used it later. So
even going to Limelight, that gag that he did with the Buster Keaton.
Yeah.
And I think, what was the thing that they were doing, The Professor, that he did in 1919, that was that film he was going to try to do,
right,
and then they shot the scene and then they abandoned it.
right.
That almost was brought back in Limelight, I think.
He did,
And he was the circus
Please, yeah,
guy.
it's in Limelight.
and so in By the Sea, that little short that he did, you know, for SNA at the ocean, he actually has a little thing where it's supposedly the guy, I think it's Billy Gilbert, the guy that he was, you know, fighting with, he was trying to indicate that, you know, he had fleas, so he was kind of doing like the flea act. But he kept those ideas in his head, so when I hear that, when people say they shared ideas, and I'm like, you know, I'm not going to say they didn't because I don't have proof, but I just think to myself, it doesn't sound like something that he would have done. He would keep it in his head and, you know.
Yeah. So, Sarah, when you tell people that you're into Chaplin, like, what is their reaction to that?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm a big fan of Charlie Chaplin. Let's see. They're like, oh, that's different. They don't really know what to say. They're like, I've never seen one of his films, which doesn't surprise me. And then I'm like, well, maybe you should try one. Maybe you'll like it. And I'll recommend like one or two, usually a short, just to keep their attention, because I know the features, they might get drained or something. And
the shorts are always a good way to go at first, because it's not too much.
It's not too much. And the short that I tend to recommend the most is Easy Street, because it has a little bit of everything that Chaplin has. It has some sentimentality. It has some slapstick. It has like part of his biography, I guess, because it's kind of on the streets of London, if you think about it. And it's just plain silly, but it's still a short, and that's the one I tend to recommend to my friends to watch.
That's really funny that you mentioned that, because my friend Jose, who I got into Chaplin big time, that was the first Chaplin film I showed him too.
Yeah, right.
That's really weird that we both thought alike about that, because it kind of has a combination of everything in one in a good 20-minute film that you would want to get out of Chaplin.
Yeah, and it shows his craft without overdoing it and not being too late of the tramp. It's right in the middle. He's still like crude, but he's starting to realize that he has a heart, I guess.
No, definitely. And the end of Easy Street's just fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
He's reformed the whole city, not the city, the whole town.
Yeah, right. Neighborhood.
And even Eric Campbell is going to church at the end.
Yeah. So many social issues in that. You know, the wife getting beat by the husband, you know, drug addiction, you know, the man that had all those children overcrowding, and actually, the implication was that in the basement, this man was going to rape Edna, sexual assault. So, I mean,
Yeah, it's not said, but it's just implied
right,
that that's what's going to happen. And, you show people movies like that, they don't expect to see anything
right,
relating to, drug abuse or, rape.
right,
And
exactly,
Chaplin did it in such a way that it was almost that he made it funny,
right.
And it's almost like that scene in The Kid when it always gets an uncomfortable laugh when he's sitting there by the sewer grate
Right.
and he's looking at the kid and then he looks at the sewer grate and he opens it
And
and then I can't remember if he looks up at the audience.
No, he doesn't do that.
He doesn't do that,
No, he
but
looks at the kid and the gray, and he's like, "Should I? Shouldn't I?" And then he ultimately decides, "No."
I mean, that's a terrible thing. That's a terrible, terrible idea to propose. But he does it so well that you laugh, but you feel uncomfortable about laughing about it.
Well, yeah, but also back then, there wasn't birth control, and there was families that had so many children, and there had to have been times when people just think it's a horrible thought, but it's just, who would know? You know what I'm saying? It is. It's very uncomfortable, and and the whole thing with the kid about the fact that this woman had a child out of wedlock, and when he puts that statue of Jesus going up the mountain, carrying his cross,
Big time symbolism.
Yes.
There. Mm-hmm.
And
that almost harkens back to what the German expressionist films were doing at that time.
Right.
So you have to wonder, was Chaplin seeing the, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and all those early or late teens horror movies in the early 20s?
Right.
Because can you think of any earlier example of Charlie doing that in a film? Making those overtly symbolic connections to his characters?
You know what? Probably.
I can't either, so I'm not testing anyone.
There.
The thing, though, one of the things I like about him is how he carries themes throughout his films, and they're so subtle. But then when you put the pieces together, like his obsession with nude statues, okay? It's so obvious in City Lights. It's this big statue, and he's checking her out, But when you keep going back and back into his films, it's like, the other day I was watching Jitney Elopement, and they're looking at a little nude statue, and the Keystone, the space in the barroom floor, there's nude statues, and
in work too. In work, isn't there a little nude statue that he puts a lampshade on?
Looks up,
and he does a little dance with the lampshade,
and,
but then he looks under the lampshade like he's looking up her dress.
That is brilliant,
type thing.
Yeah.
Because what it is that he comes into the house and he keeps looking at this statue, and he leaves the room. And you can see he's obsessed with the statue.
He's obsessed with it. Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Once he puts the skirt on her, looks up her skirt, he's good. That's it.
Yeah.
I'm done. But that stuff, because you can see it's what is his deal with the statue? Because he kept leaving and looking, But that was a theme with him, and the flowers too, which he used in many of his films, but that new statue, and then he just brings it to, City Lights is this huge statue, and it's just, and the thing too about City Lights is that statue, you can clearly see that he's interested in the female form. Because through City Lights, a lot of times, just the way that he is kiss the millionaire and things. It was almost like they, or the boxing when he was flirting or, whatever with Hank Mann. It was like an implication like maybe he was gay. But
oh, that scene gets a big laugh.
Yes.
Every time it's shown.
Yes.
Because when the boxer goes, Hank Mann goes behind the the curtain to take his pants off.
I love that.
That's something that he hints at all this stuff, but he doesn't go. He makes a little hint and then he stops, and then it's on to the next thing.
Yeah.
If that had gone on any further, it probably would have been an uncomfortable type thing. But he does just enough and then pulls it back.
Yeah, and that
to something else.
That was creepy. And you're right.
Mm-hmm.
And then he stopped it. But at the beginning,
That's one of the best gags in the, I think, one of the funniest scenes in the whole movie. And then with the rabbit's foot,
Oh my God.
when he rubs the rabbit's foot on him and then he rubs it off.
Like, ugh, no.
Yeah.
you know what? And speaking of like, the boxer, the African American, he used very few African Americans in his films. But when he did, because back then there was a lot of blackface and making fun of them, and he never did that, and a lot of I don't know. I heard somebody talking Buster Keaton film that
Yeah.
there was a lot of blackface. Yes.
I mean, 100 years from now, they're going to be looking at the things that we put on TV and that we have on the internet.
Right.
And they're going to think that stuff is deplorable and racist and sexist. And, I mean, look at, like, Nicki Minaj.
Yeah.
I think that, to me, I mean, I'm not personally offended by it, but somehow that's acceptable today.
Right.
But as far as, like, objectifying women or being a racist or whatever, to me, that Anaconda video is just as racist and sexist as anything that was put out in the teens and 20s.
Right.
It's just because it's now
Modern.
It's modern,
Right.
so it's not really looked upon as that.
Mm-hmm.
I feel. But there's so many things that I see today, and I'm just like, that's just as bad as anything that, Eddie Cantor did or anything that Jolson did that they get all this heat about.
Right.
And it's just funny because they're viewing it from the perspective of today's society.
Right.
And it's so easy to look at something old and say, oh, that's racist or that's not funny or that's wrong or something. But it's just, I don't think a lot of people have that ability to put something in a historical perspective.
It's just like, I was saying to you, Nigel, earlier, it's like I always try to keep my focus on his films and his art, and I don't get into his personal life because, first of all, he was a human being with flaws like all of us. Another thing, too, is I feel uncomfortable, the fact that his children are still alive, and I don't know, that's just my personal thing, but...
Well, Sarah, if somebody came to you and said, like, they were interested in getting into Chaplin... Mm-hmm. Like, what would you... I know you said Easy Street earlier. What would you tell them about him first?
Ooh. Let's see.
I know, I'm coming up with these off the top of my head. I had all this stuff written down, and I haven't even, like, done that yet, so... But that's what's great about this, is it just comes out, as we're discussing things.
When I talk about Chaplin with my friends and stuff, and they're like, okay, Sarah, calm down. I'll, like, get into, like... Of course, Chaplin had a penchant for younger girls. They were teenage girls, and I went and.
That's the first thing you're gonna say.
Yes.
What I talk about.
And also he was a filmmaker too, but he loved young girls.
What I do say when I tell people about his film, like not about his private life, but his filmmaking, is that he did everything. He directed, he wrote, he composed, he acted, he made his own costume, he did his own makeup, he produced. He would have been every character if he could have. Mm-hmm. So he just embodies what controlling his art is all about. And I think that's what filmmakers today are trying to do. If they make their own movies, directors are more inclined to write screenplays than they used to, and Chaplin's the prime example of that. That's what I tend to talk about.
And Anne, what would you say if somebody came to you and they had a moderate interest in Chaplin? What would be the first film you would show them, and what would be the first thing you would say to them to get them into it?
Actually, I love The Pawn Shop. Okay, I love The Pawn Shop because it's full of gags, and it's full of, he had the ability to look at something and imagine something else, okay, and that film is full of it. But it also shows that, the way that he was, like, unmerciful in his treatment of that bookkeeper, John Rand, and it was funny because it's like, you can imagine that there's somebody at your job that's just, I love when he's a pain in the ass. When he plays a pain in the ass in a film, it just cracks me up. And that film is full of, the alarm clock, when he dismantles the alarm clock, and, when he does that little ta-da, when he's in the trunk, and then he pops out and he ends up hitting Eric Campbell, who played the villain, and then he turns around to the camera, he's like, ta-da! It's that kind of stuff. And actually, that's the one when I was telling you about Dan Kamen, that's the one that he showed and, we discussed, because it's just a fun film, and the thing about Charlie Chaplin that I say is that he's so relevant. He's just cool, you know what I'm saying? And younger...
Well, like you said, though, Chaplin is from the old era, but his films have a freshness about them that a lot of movies from those eras don't have.
Correct.
And I feel like you can show somebody a Chaplin film, and they'll still laugh at it. Whereas a lot of, I mean, I might get a lot of hate for this. I watched The Dentist, the W.C. Fields movie,
Yeah.
and I couldn't get into it. I didn't think it was that funny. I mean, it's all about golf and stuff.
Right.
Trying to give this a shot, and it was like, I just can't get through this movie.
Right.
And but something about Chaplin is so timeless that you could put him in any era, I feel, and he would succeed. His films would succeed.
Yeah.
Whereas in a lot of other actors and comedians from that time, it just wouldn't work out that way for him.
The thing is, too, purportedly, he used to go to the movie theater. And, the fact that for so many years he was completely unrecognizable. So he had this character in the films, and then he was able to walk around, the masses and what have you. But he would go to the movie theater, and he would see what people were laughing at in his films, and that was important to him. And that's how he was able to, figure out what could be funny, what couldn't, and he never did, what did he say? He never did a gag for the gag's sake, meaning he didn't just throw in a gag just because, I got to fill some time. It had to make sense to him, and Unknown Chaplin clearly shows, how, if he didn't like something, he would just throw it aside, because that's also the important thing, that he had control, but he had financial control. He never had a studio bigwig come down to him and say, I'm talking after 1918, but, he never had these studio bigwigs say, come on, this film's got to get out. That was important to him, that, he had that financial control, because then he could do everything.
Yeah, well, that's why I feel like his films have a different vibe to them, is because they weren't structured by a studio.
Right.
Or told, you have to put this in or you have to take that out. You can imagine if Alfred Hitchcock was able to make his movies, if he owned his own studio like Chaplin did and was able to do all the things that Chaplin had the luxury of doing,
right.
How much more Hitchcock would have pushed things.
Right, and...
But Sarah, it's funny, I'll ask you this question, because it's funny that people are always shocked when they see Chaplin out of makeup.
Yeah.
Any girl I've ever shown a Chaplin film to, when I show them a picture of him out of makeup, they're like, "Oh my God, he's so good looking!"
Yeah.
Like you never would have expected that.
Oh yeah, I have heard that several times, and I get some flack from people my own age saying, "Oh, that's the only reason you like him." Like, no. Have you watched his movies? Because he doesn't look like that at all, and that's what I'm paying attention to. And I read a lot about him, and I like looking at the rare pictures of Chaplin out of makeup, and there's that behind the scenes film he did where he's like putting on the makeup and the costume. I just love that.
That's one of the best. I love that. That's really cool.
And most of the pictures of him out of makeup are in like the late 20s and 30s. There aren't a lot pre-20s of him younger, I guess.
Go ahead.
I never said my favorite films.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Realize that. Okay.
Go ahead.
My favorite short would have to be The Rink. I just love his athleticism. It's not really athleticism. How balletic he is. He just is so graceful when he's going about the skating rink, and it's just very fluid. I just think it's wonderful. It looks beautiful, but it's still funny. That's why I like the rink. And my favorite feature is the gold rush. The scene where they're eating the shoe gets me every time. I think it's brilliant. More so, I mean, the scene where they're unbalanced on the edge of the cliff.
Yeah.
That's pretty funny too. But eating the shoe out of mere starvation, which is very serious, and the Klondike Gold Rush is nothing to laugh about.
No, that was terrible. Yeah.
But he made it funny.
Right.
And there.
How cool was it to see the 1925 version finally released? Did you get the Blu-ray, the Criterion Blu-ray that just came out? Oh, okay. Well, it's the definitive version of the 1925 version of the film, because it has the extra scene at the end with him and Georgia Hale falling down the steps, and when he takes the picture and he says, "Oh, you spoiled the movie." The scenes that they cut out of the 1940s version, because
I think it was because of
the narrated one.
Yeah, I hate that he took out the last scene when he did it in the 1940s. He just takes it out, and he can because it's his movie. But
that's a whole podcast. Oh, that's a whole discussion for another podcast we could have, is whether or not his re-edits later on help the movies or hurt them.
Right.
He went into George Lucas mode towards the end, and it's what the Chaplin family has decided, I think, is that the later edits that he did are the definitive versions of those films, because that's how he wanted it. But I'm so thankful that they put the Gold Rush, the 1925 version, and they restored that, and they treated that as the authentic version, because that's the version they came out in 25, and that's his viewpoint, his mindset at the time. And I look at that the same way as I look at the Star Wars special editions with all the extra scenes and this and that and the other. It's, if you want to check it out and if you want to look at the vision as it was later on, that's fine. But as long as the original version is the main feature, that's the important part. And I'm happy that they're doing that now, at least.
Well, supposedly, I have from a somewhat reliable source, the kid, he took a lot of, Edna's story. Supposedly, that will never be put back, the family, like you said, wants it to be the way that he wanted. But I shudder to think, had Chaplin continued to live an extremely long life, he just would have been butchering. Because that's what he did. He just went in, like you said, and he was just editing his films. And now it's exciting, though, if you find like an old print of Shoulder Arms, and you're like, oh, wow, there's the, the gag that he did, like 3 on a match, and, broke his, so it's exciting.
Well, if you can hunt down the old Image DVDs, in the late 90s, they put out a Chaplin series, and those are the original versions of all the films with the original scenes all put back in. And especially the First National set, it sells for a lot online now. If you can get the First National set that was put out by Image, that's all the uncut versions of those films. And I don't think those versions will ever be released again, because those aren't the ones that apparently Chaplin wanted later on in life. And that's the request that his family has put in, that they keep those versions. But I hope at some point they're issued, because there are a lot of good gags in those that get edited out.
Well, maybe when his grandkids kind of take over the helm, because all of his children are still alive, Geraldine is 72, she's the oldest, but maybe then it'll be a different, perspective, But now, let me just ask you real quick.
Or, put both versions on. Have both versions, you can fit so much information on a Blu-ray now. You could put, the 70s edit that Chaplin did, and then 20s edit that Chaplin did. You can put 3 or 4 different movie scores on the film, which a lot of the silents that have been released by different companies have been doing. They give you the option: do you want an audio commentary? Do you want a piano score? Do you want a symphonic movie score? Do you want the rock techno version that somebody came up
Yeah,
with.
and most of the Gold Rush DVD that I have, and I think most of the Gold Rush releases they have both versions, the 25 and then the re-release in the 40s, which is good.
That's awesome. That's how it should be. You should, in this day and age, you should have the option to watch whatever version that you want, I feel.
I
How about a colorized version?
don't even get me started.
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
No way.
I know.
Okay. Well, on that note, we'll wrap this one up. Thanks for joining us on this first episode, and hopefully we'll have a few more of these to come, and a lot of engaging conversation involved. So hope to see you on the next episode. Thanks, Sarah and Anne, and we'll get this rolling, and hopefully it only goes up from here. So see you next time.